I knew something shady was going on the second I heard that plow scrape past my window at 3 in the morning. Again, for the fourth time that week, I'm Trevor Ralston. I'm a surgical tech at the county hospital, 12-hour shifts, no excuses, no late arrivals. When I bought my house in Windermere Oaks, I thought I was getting peace and quiet, not a front-row seat to the pettiest power trip I've ever seen in my life. And it all started with one woman, Regina Dobbins, HOA president. Middle-aged, bleach-blonde bob and a voice like a car alarm you can't shut off. "Trevor, your driveway is too close to the mailboxes. It's obstructing the plows," she told me the first time she waddled up in her puffy coat, arms crossed like she was interrogating a suspect. I blinked at her. "My driveway's been here longer than you've been on the board," she sniffed. "The HOA has reviewed the logistics. It's a hazard." Translation: she didn't like me, and this was her latest made-up rule to make my life hell. I didn't think much of it, until the snow started. That winter hit hard. The city plows came through the main roads, but inside our neighborhood, the HOA had hired their own crew. And guess what? Every time it snowed, they'd plow the street right up until my property line and then dump the entire pile directly across my driveway. Not beside it, not near it. Directly across it, a 5-foot wall of packed snow and ice every single time. The first morning I thought it was a mistake. I grabbed my shovel and got to work, but I was 2 hours late to my shift. The second time I called the HOA. Regina answered with that fake sweet voice. "Oh no, how inconvenient for you," she said, dragging every word. "But the plows can't adjust just for one home. Maybe consider relocating your vehicle during storms." "To where? My roof?" She hung up. By the third week, I'd missed 5 shifts and burned through the last of my PTO. I was out nearly a month's worth of wages. I kept documenting everything: photos, timestamps, even video of the plow driver dropping a mountain of snow across my driveway and giving a little wave to Regina's porch camera. I confronted her in person next. "You're blocking my driveway on purpose, Regina." She didn't even flinch. "It's not personal, Trevor. It's protocol. Maybe if you attended more HOA meetings, you'd understand. I work 12-hour hospital shifts. I don't have time to sit through your whine and complain sessions." Her lips tightened. "Well, maybe you should reconsider your priorities." Oh, I did. And I made sure documenting her smug little snow war became my top priority. The fourth week, I stopped clearing the snow altogether. I wasn't giving up. I was building a case. I'd mounted a motion-activated camera above my garage, aimed right at the street. Every time their plow rolled in and dumped a miniature glacier across my drive, it recorded the whole thing. I backed it all up: videos, timestamps, and even a couple of receipts from Uber rides I was forced to take just to get to work when I couldn't dig out in time. One of those trips cost me $80 because the driver had to wait for me to climb over a snowbank in hospital scrubs. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was calculating. Regina liked to think she had the neighborhood wrapped around her manicured finger, but she didn't know half as much about the law as she pretended to. I did some digging. Not online nonsense, actual municipal code. I found a clause tucked into the county's property maintenance ordinance that prohibited any entity, private or public, from obstructing access to a residential driveway in a non-emergency situation. It didn't matter if it was snow, dirt, or a stack of bricks. Obstruction was obstruction. That was my first card. The second came from a neighbor 2 doors down. His name was Marcus, retired fire captain, sharp as ever, and not a fan of Regina's. One morning while I was out front snapping photos of the latest snow barricade, he wandered over with a thermos in one hand and an envelope in the other. "You're not the only one," he said, handing me the envelope. Inside were 6 photos. Same plow, same driver, same tactic, but this time dumped in front of his daughter's minivan. "She's got 2 kids under 5, Marcus said. "Had to call out of work 3 times. I told Regina to knock it off, and she told me to shovel faster." I tapped the envelope against my palm. "You mind if I use these? Use them to bury her?" And that's when I filed the complaint. I didn't go to the HOA board. I went straight to the city's Department of Public Works and submitted everything. Video files, photos. A copy of the HOA's snow removal contract, which I'd requested under the HOA's own transparency clause. The contract clearly stated that snow was to be pushed to the curbside, not across driveways. 3 days later, I got a call from a city inspector. His voice was low and annoyed. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about Windermere Oaks," he said, "but it's the most thorough." He scheduled a site visit. That morning, I took personal time from the hospital unpaid since I was fresh out of PTO and waited. The inspector showed up in a city-marked SUV and walked the whole block with me and Marcus. We showed him everything. Regina came out halfway through, waving her clipboard like it was a badge. "You can't inspect private streets without HOA approval?" she snapped. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "Actually, I can. Your plow's been obstructing public access to private property. That's a violation of Municipal Code 4.18.03. Her face twitched. I stayed quiet and let her dig her own hole. The inspector took more photos, asked a few questions, and left without another word. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, a certified letter landed in my mailbox summons for small claims court. Regina had countersued me for defamation and interference with HOA operations. Said my complaint triggered an investigation that led to their snow removal contract being suspended temporarily. She was demanding $10,000 in damages. That was her mistake. Because now, everything was going on record. I hired an attorney, a friend of a friend who specialized in civil litigation. His name was Paul, and he had the patience of a monk and the instincts of a bloodhound. He took one look at my evidence and said, "She picked the wrong guy to mess with." We filed a cross-claim for damages. $45,000 for lost wages, transportation costs, and punitive damages relating to willful obstruction of essential worker transportation. Turns out the state had a statute that protected health industry employees during declared emergencies like, say, a brutal winter compounded by hospital staffing shortages. The court date was set for mid-March. I spent the next 4 weeks gathering sworn statements from other neighbors who'd been blocked in by Regina's private plow squad. Marcus, his daughter, a retired teacher who'd missed a specialist appointment, a single mom whose car was blocked during a medical emergency. One neighbor even had a voicemail saved of Regina laughing about the snow wall in front of my place. Paul grinned when he played it in court. The judge, a woman with sharp glasses and a no-nonsense tone, listened to the whole thing without blinking. Regina tried to spin it. "Mr. Ralston has been adversarial since the beginning. Our snow removal policy is consistent with neighborhood standards. He refused to cooperate." Paul didn't even rise for rebuttal. He just hit play on the video of the plow driver stopping dead in front of my driveway, adjusting the chute, and unloading a solid 10 seconds of packed snow directly in front of my garage. The timestamp was 3:17 a.m. The judge leaned forward. "Is there a reason this driver appears to be targeting one property repeatedly?" Regina's lawyer stammered something about snow flow patterns. Paul stood. "Your Honor, we also have evidence that the HOA president instructed the driver to do this on multiple occasions. We have affidavits, voicemail recordings, and photographic documentation spanning nearly a month." The judge looked at Regina. "You do understand that intentional obstruction of access to one's property, especially when said resident is classified as an essential worker, is a serious matter." Regina crossed her arms and mumbled something under her breath. The judge banged the gavel once. "Judgment is granted in favor of Mr. Ralston. The court awards $45,000 in damages. Additionally, I will be referring this matter to the city attorney's office for review of possible criminal obstruction charges." Regina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I walked out of the courthouse without a word. Paul clapped me on the back and said, "She's going to need a snow shovel for what's coming next." By the time I got home, word had already spread. Marcus was on his porch with 2 beers. I took one and sat down next to him. Across the street, Regina's porch light was off for the first time in weeks. "Think she'll resign?" Marcus asked. I sipped the beer. "She might, or maybe she'll just learn to plow straight." The money hit my account 3 days after the ruling, $45,000. I wasn't the kind of person who celebrated with champagne or Instagram posts, but I did something better. I donated a chunk of it to the hospital's Surgical Tech Scholarship Fund. Quietly. No press. Just a note that said, "For the ones who show up no matter what." But there was still a mess to clean up. Because while Regina had lost in court, she hadn't backed down, not really. She'd gone quiet, sure, but not in a surrender kind of way. More like a cornered animal deciding whether to bolt or bite. The HOA board didn't meet publicly for over a month. Their website didn't post a single update. No minutes, no announcements, no transparency. That was unusual. Especially for a group that used to send out passive-aggressive flyers about lawn height and improperly colored flower pots. Then one afternoon, a knock rattled my front door. I opened it to find a man in a charcoal suit and a badge clipped to his belt, Detective Grant, from the city's Property Crimes Division. He introduced himself and asked if he could speak to me about the Windermere Oaks HOA. I stepped aside. He pulled out a manila folder and set it on my kitchen table. "We've been looking into them for a while," he said. "Your complaint pushed it across the line." I leaned against the counter. "Across the line into what?" Grant flipped open the folder. Inside were copies of checks, spreadsheets, and a scanned snow removal contract, but not the one I had. This one had different numbers, inflated ones. "Turns out your HOA's been submitting falsified invoices to justify their annual dues increases," he said. "That Plowed driver, he was billing triple the city rate and none of the numbers added up. They claimed to be paying for 4 plow passes per night for the entire neighborhood. That's 24 homes. But surveillance footage from your camera and a few others shows he only ever did 3 passes, 1 loop, plus double dumps on you and 2 others." I frowned. "So Regina was overpaying him?" Grant shook his head. "No, she was laundering the difference. The contractor's company is registered to her cousin. The checks went to him. He withdrew the cash and Regina deposited it into a personal account under a shell landscaping company." I blinked. "You're telling me she wasn't just harassing residents, she was stealing from them?" "About $67,000 over 2 winters," he said. "And that's just what we've confirmed so far." I let that sit for a second. "So what happens now?" "We've got a warrant for financial records and server access," he said. "I just came to let you know your footage is going to be submitted as part of the investigation, and we'll likely want you to testify again." "Gladly," he nodded once, then packed up the folder and left. That evening, the neighborhood buzzed. 2 unmarked sedans parked outside the HOA office, a converted room in Regina's basement, and 2 officers entered with a locksmith. They emerged half an hour later with boxes, laptops, a stack of binders. And one very pale Regina, escorted into a cruiser without cuffs but clearly not voluntarily. No one said a word. Not a whisper. People just stood on their porches, watching the Queen get dethroned in real time. The next day, the city issued a public statement. A formal investigation into financial misconduct by the Windermere Oaks HOA Executive Board. Regina was suspended from all HOA duties pending charges of fraud, misappropriation of funds, and obstruction of municipal access. The snow was melting, but the storm had just begun. By the following week, 3 other board members resigned. The treasurer claimed she had no idea about the fake invoices, but the emails recovered from Regina's laptop suggested otherwise. One message read, "Don't worry, Trevor won't be a problem. He's just another shift zombie." That one stung. Not because it was insulting, but because it showed how calculated it all really was. Marcus and I weren't the only ones paying attention anymore. A group of residents, led by a retired paralegal named Dana, organized a recall election. They went door to door with clipboards, collecting signatures to dissolve the current board entirely and restructure the HOA with new bylaws, ones that required quarterly financial disclosures, term limits, and mandatory independent audits. I hadn't planned on getting involved, but Dana asked me to join the interim committee. Said people trusted me now, not because of the lawsuit, but because I'd stood up when no one else had. I agreed on one condition. "We're setting up a community fund," I said during our first meeting in Marcus's garage. "For elderly residents, single parents, anyone who needs help maintaining their property during bad weather. No more weaponizing snow, no more using rules to punish people. We take care of each other." There was a silence. Then Dana nodded. "That's exactly the kind of change we need." The vote happened 2 weeks later, a record turnout. 92% voted for the dissolution of the old board. The new bylaws passed unanimously. Regina's trial began in early summer. She'd been charged with 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of criminal mischief. I testified alongside Marcus, Dana, and 2 other residents who'd been targeted. The prosecution laid out everything: the fake landscaping company, the forged invoices, and the coordinated plow harassment. The defense tried to paint Regina as overwhelmed and misguided, but the jury didn't buy it. Especially not after the prosecution played a recorded Zoom call where Regina said, if they want their driveways clear, they can get off their lazy butts and do it themselves. I'm not their babysitter. It took the jury less than a day. She was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 18 months in county detention plus restitution to the HOA. Her cousin took a plea deal and flipped, agreeing to pay back his share in exchange for probation. The city stepped in to supervise the HOA's transition under Dana's leadership. They assigned a municipal liaison to monitor future budgets and ensure compliance with community governance laws. The plow contracts were redone this time with a verified, vetted company. One that actually showed up on time, pushed snow evenly, and didn't play favorites. The funny part: the total cost of proper snow removal was less than half what Regina had claimed. Turns out, honesty is cheaper than corruption. By the time the next winter rolled around, I had a new shovel, a new camera system, and a freshly paved driveway. Not because I needed it, but because I wanted a clean slate. The first snow fell in December. Light, gentle. The plow rolled through around midnight, clearing the roads with quiet efficiency. I watched from my window just to be sure. No piles, no blockades, just smooth pavement. And for the first time in a long while, Windermere Oaks felt like a neighborhood again. Not a battlefield, not a dictatorship. Just a place where people lived, worked, and helped each other out. As for me, I went back to my shifts without stress. No more digging out at dawn. No more calculating travel times in blizzards. Just the hum of routine, the rhythm of normalcy. And every time I pulled into my clear, unobstructed driveway, I remembered one thing: bullies don't win when you stand your ground. They just melt. The summer after Regina's conviction, a quiet ripple of change ran through Windermere Oaks. Not loud, no parades or press releases, just subtle things. A missing HOA sign replaced with a community bulletin board. The old laminated rule sheets vanished from mailboxes. And for the first time since I'd moved in, the annual dues letter came with a full breakdown of expenses, with a handwritten note from Dana thanking residents for their trust. I kept expecting something to go wrong, but it didn't. That winter came and went with clean roads, no drama, and the quiet hum of neighbors taking care of one another. The kind of peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. But in late March, something strange happened. I got a call from Paul, my attorney from the lawsuit. I hadn't heard from him since the trial wrapped up, and hearing his voice again had me sitting upright at my kitchen table before he'd even finished saying hello. "There's a federal angle," he said. I didn't respond right away. The words didn't connect, he continued. The city's audit flagged some inconsistencies in how Regina handled community grant funds. Turns out Windermere Oaks was part of a storm resilience pilot program, federal funding meant to support neighborhoods during extreme weather. Snow removal was one of the items. That money didn't just disappear. It was misused. I leaned forward. How much? Just under $200,000. That was enough to make me stand. I paced toward the window, staring out at the street that had once been a war zone of plow piles and ice barricades. Now it looked like a postcard. You'd never know what had happened here, but the money trail didn't lie. What does that mean for us? I asked. It means the Department of Housing and Urban Development is opening a fraud investigation, Paul said, and they're asking if you'd be willing to talk to them. Not just about the snow issue, but the HOA's governance practices under Regina. I agreed. Not because I wanted to drag this out, but because I knew what it felt like to be on the receiving end of someone else's scheme. The federal agents arrived 2 days later. A woman named Agent Howard led the meeting. She was sharp, no nonsense, and carried a laptop instead of a briefcase. "We're not just looking at Regina," she said, setting up in my living room. "We're looking at a potential pattern." Windermere Oaks was one of 5 neighborhoods in the storm pilot program. All 5 received similar grants. 2 have already shown signs of misappropriation. I nodded slowly. She didn't act alone. The treasurer signed off on everything. Howard raised an eyebrow. "We've subpoenaed her financials." There's overlap between her personal bank account and the HOA reserve fund. Transfers made on the same days the grant disbursements hit. I thought back to the old board meetings, the ones I never attended, but always heard about from Marcus afterwards. The catered lunches. The sudden landscaping upgrades to Regina's property, labeled as community beautification. It all made sense now. They asked me for access to my footage archives, all of it. Not just the plow incidents, but any HOA-related activity captured on my property. I'd kept everything, out of habit. Out of caution. I gave them full access. 3 weeks later, the arrest started. The treasurer, a soft-spoken retiree named Evelyn who'd always worn floral scarves and carried a clipboard, was taken into custody outside the grocery store. 2 former board members were brought in on charges of wire fraud and conspiracy. The federal complaint detailed a scheme that went far beyond snow. Fake invoices for tree removal, non-existent community events, even a phony emergency generator purchase that had netted nearly $30,000, all of it documented. All of it traced back to personal accounts. Regina's name was on almost every document. During the federal hearing, the prosecution laid out the full extent. The HOA, under Regina's leadership, had siphoned off federal funds meant for emergency preparedness and used them to fund personal projects, cosmetic surgeries, vacations, even a down payment on a condo in Florida that had been held under a shell company tied to her cousin's name. I sat in the back of the courtroom watching as the pieces fell into place. The evidence spoke louder than any testimony. Documents, bank transfers, surveillance footage, even a recorded phone call where Regina told her cousin, "They think I'm using it for salt and sand." It's not my fault the government hands out checks like candy. Her attorney tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, that she'd mistakenly believed the funds could be used at the HOA board's discretion. But the email trails, the shell companies, and the deliberate falsification of receipts destroyed that defense. The judge didn't hesitate. Regina was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, with restitution of $214,000. Evelyn took a plea deal and agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. The other 2 board members received probation and a 5-year ban from holding any fiduciary position within a homeowners association. After Regina's sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse with Dana and Marcus. Neither of them said anything at first. We just stood on the steps, watching the reporters pack up their equipment, the last of the crowd dispersing. Dana broke the silence. "You think anyone ever joins an HOA planning to steal from their neighbors?" Marcus folded his arms. "No. But powers like wet cement, Step in too deep and you're stuck. I didn't say anything, just stared out at the street, thinking how easily it could have gone unnoticed, how close it came to being buried under snow and silence. Windermere Oaks re-elected its new board that fall. Dana stayed on as president reluctantly. She didn't want power. She wanted order. The new treasurer was a retired accountant who audited every expense down to the receipt. The bylaws were rewritten again, this time with input from every resident. Every vote was counted by hand, and every meeting was streamed online. I stayed on the advisory committee for another year before stepping down. I didn't want my whole identity tied to what happened. I just wanted to go back to being Trevor Ralston, the guy with the clean driveway and the weird hours. One evening, I came home after a double shift and found something taped to my front door. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't a notice. Just a thank you card, no name, no return address. Inside was a single line written in blocky handwriting. You shoveled more than snow. I kept it. By the next winter, the plow drivers knew the neighborhood by name. They stopped to chat. They waved at kids. They didn't dump anything anywhere it didn't belong. The roads were always cleared by morning, and no one had to fight their way to work or beg for a fair shake. Justice didn't come with flashing lights or breaking news. It came quietly, over time, in 100 small ways, in the absence of threats, in the presence of trust. And every time I pulled into my driveway smooth, clear, and unblocked, I remembered what it took to get here. Not just a lawsuit, not just a court win. It took people saying enough, and